It is absolutely possible since several countries are obviously geographically located between Iran and Israel. So far, there hasn't been a significant impact apart from those that have joined to support Iran, which are so far only the Houthis in Yemen. And so we've seen Israel striking Yemen as well. Now, as we know, over the last 20 months, Israel has been on a spree to degrade the network, the resistance groups that are in support of Iran. And we've seen that happen particularly in Lebanon with Hezbollah, but also with Hamas, of course, and Gaza. And so it seems like many of these groups, including those that operate in Iraq, are not so keen on joining the fray, at least not yet. Absolutely. I think that this has been a part of a larger strategy that has been going on since 7 October, really, whereby Israel has taken one step at a time. And I think the start of the end, so to speak, probably came when Israel killed the Palestinian, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. And from then on, we really saw a chain reaction whereby Israel started decapitating the leadership of the resistance across the region, including Hezbollah, to some degree also the Houthis in Yemen, although they haven't been as successful. Obviously, it's located further away. Also, the US strikes that we've seen there haven't been that impactful to date. But I think definitely it has provided Israel with the leverage to attempt the extensive strikes that they have done over the weekend. It completely depends on the actors in these countries. As soon as the Houthis struck Israel, we saw a response to that. If, let's say, Hezbollah would decide to reactivate their front line against Israel, or if the Iraqi resistance groups would do so, I think that Israel would also consider striking these countries. Now, in the past, when it comes to the Iraqi groups, for instance, they mainly operated out of Syria, and so it was easier to strike them there. At the time, that was sort of a zone that wasn't really contested, and the Americans were not in harm's way in the same way as they are in Iraq. And Iraq has been shielded to a certain degree throughout these 20 months that we've seen this escalation go off and on between Iran and Israel, because we've had this, or we still have, obviously, the American presence here. So Israel has also, even though it's obviously used Iraqi airspace, it has refrained from attacking Iraq. Now, if the resistance groups in Iraq would decide to join the fray, then I'm not so sure that Israel would spare Iraq at this point. No one can tell for sure, I think, depending on how this develops. But the statements that we've seen from the resistance groups so far, Kitab, Hezbollah, and others, even if they say that they support Iran, there was, for instance, a statement today saying that Iran can manage this on their own. Now, I read that as an indication that they are not really that willing to expose themselves to the same fate that Hezbollah saw in Lebanon, for instance. They would probably like to stay out of this for as long as they possibly can. And they're calling on the Iraqi government, for instance, to act against US forces, to expel them from the country, which is rhetoric that we've seen in the past. It is nothing new. I don't think that we're going to see any steps on that, but I think that actually the relationship between the US and Iraq at the moment is at a place where neither side, in terms of the governments, actually want an escalation to impact Iraq. And so, at least for the moment, Iraq seems to be out of harm's way, but that completely depends on, how far this escalation between Iran and Israel will go, I think. Yes, I think that they have seen how Israel has decapitated the leadership of Hezbollah. They have seen that Israel did not refrain from going after military leadership in Iran itself. And so that already gives an indication that Israel is also willing to attack them if they would be attacked by these groups, right? So for now, I think that they will lay low And also considering that Iraq has upcoming elections, I don't think that they would want to be in a position where their domestic power is affected by this current escalation. Look, I think that the Arab countries, and in particular the Gulf countries, are quite fed up with the escalation that we've seen over the last 20 months. And we've also, during this period, seen quite an unprecedented rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, for instance. And of course, these countries benefit from rising oil prices, etc. But also, if you look at it from the other point of view, um, they will be affected because of lowering trade in this area if this continues for a long time. So I think most countries in this region would actually want this to come to an end, because, of course, these countries are also worried that they might be struck by Iran if Iran perceives that they are supporting the US in particular. And the US has still not joined this escalation. I mean, it's obviously supporting Israel indirectly. It has helped Israel to intercept some of these missiles, uh, but mainly from the ground, right? So they haven't used air power yet. They haven't used naval vessels. And hopefully we won't get to that point. But if we do, I think that especially the Gulf Arab states are going to be in a very difficult position. And all of their efforts right now to calm down the situation seem to be in vain. I mean, the only actor that can really do anything about this is the US. And as we've seen, the next round of talks between the US and Iran that were supposed to held in Muscat have now been delayed. So we're in a wait and see situation in terms of how this will develop. I mean, Donald Trump, the president of the US, has issued several statements over the last few days. And to be very honest, it is difficult to know what he plans to do next because the Americans were in the know that something was going to happen. And we know that because they ordered their personnel to leave Iraq and other Gulf countries. So clearly, there has been some communication between the US and Israel on what was going to happen. Perhaps the US didn't know the extent to which Israel went with its initial attack, but ultimately it will defend Israel. I don't think that the Americans yet perceive that Israel is under an existential threat. And just the latest statements that we've seen by President Trump is that he believes that he can still get these two countries to come to a peaceful settlement on this. But clearly, Israel's attack has made that much more difficult. And perhaps the initial idea was that if Israel goes after Iran's nuclear facilities, then that will give the US more leverage in the talks, and bend Iran's arm to the degree that they would come to a settlement with the US that the Americans want. I think that was probably a miscalculation. And we see that in Iran's response today. So it is not inconceivable that the US would have to step in. But we also know that the domestic pressure in the US is very much against an escalation that would drag the US into a war. And I think that President Donald Trump is very much sensitive to that domestic pressure as well, which also comes from his own constituents.